And we're back, and Tim Alexander is here with his friend. I'm just going to be literally sitting in not the driver's seat, the passenger seat. And of course, I don't want to be a front seat driver, so once in a while I'll ask a question. There's so much news. Tim, if you had a 6-hour news report, you wouldn't have enough time to cover everything. And you and your guests...
I'd get kind of tired, but I could talk nonstop. I could probably do that.
I know you could. You're a motormouth like me, but I believe it or not, I'm going to just sit back and ask the odd question. This is going to be different for everybody to say, "What do you mean, Deagle?" And I want to hear you and your friend, because I went through a 3.5-hour deep dental cleaning.
That works.
I went through 3.5 hours of deep dental cleaning, so my mouth, although it feels swollen like it's giant, but it's actually just anesthetic in there I had the most extensive cleaning by Dr. Kerb's staff, Janelle. They're top rated in this part of the country, and man, it was something. They did firstly the sonic treatment for the plaque, then they did the deep dental surgical instruments, then they put anesthetic, and they did YAG laser. Let me tell you, YAG laser will get you. I have a high pain threshold, and I passed kidney stones without anesthetic. That was a wake up call. Like when the lightning bolts jumped from my eyeball to the other, realized that's deep.
I think I'll pass on that procedure.
But it worked. I mean, as I say, I said to her, I said, if you don't keep your gums and your teeth clean, I said your alternative is a cardiac bypass. I worked in the cardiac bypass unit years ago, and I didn't see one patient who had a heart transplant or needed a cardiac bypass operation who didn't have horrible periodontal disease. If you got good, clean dental care of your teeth, it's extremely unlikely, especially if you take things like our Allison Med and our Cardiovite and so on, now called Cardiovasc, that you're going to end up with a bypass. But if you don't get a deep cleaning periodically and watch your gums, you're going to end up with a bypass operation. If you're a male and female, it'll happen a few years later, but it'll get you too, and it'll actually get you quicker than a male as you get older. So hop into the news. I'll sit back here.
Okay, yeah.
I'll be in the back of the...
I want to introduce Jeff. Jeff's been on when I've taken over your show a couple times before. Jeff DeVlay is an audio engineer and recording artist. He is a direct descendant of the Marquis de Lafayette, who was a major general in the American Revolutionary Army. There was another he was actually American, had a foreign title. Major General Lord Sterling fought on the American side, and Lafayette and Sterling, literally their headquarters were across the road from one another at Valley Forge. Jeff and I grew up right down the street from one another. Before we get into our stuff, there is one breaking story I want to cover real quick. Global research is reporting that thousands of Saudi forces have fled their bases and are refusing to participate in a ground assault on Yemen. I've been wondering when the Arab forces within the Saudi armed forces, the Arab people would begin to object to what's going on. And it looks like it's happening. This is, and by the way, many of these I'm sure were National Guard forces, which in the Saudi system, the National Guard is separate from the Army and is better equipped and is their elite. So this is a big fly in the ointment for the king, the new king of Saudi Arabia, and all the forces wreaking havoc on the civilians in Yemen.
Wow, that's a major story. And of course, last week you had something about the carrier group, because you were the expert that pointed it out. Tell us about that.
And unfortunately, both sides blinked. The Iranians had a destroyer and a support ship and several freighters with food, maybe weapons, coming in. We had at least 9 major battleships, including a supercarrier and an assault carrier, cruisers, destroyers, and so forth. And we have both blinked, and we've both gone in opposite directions. So that's a positive thing.
Wow.
What I want to do, and we're we're going into the break pretty soon here, but Jeff and I grew up at the same time, and Bill, you are just a few years younger than us. We're 64. And one thing that I sometimes say on this show is I tell people, if you want to see the geopolitical, geostrategic environment, step back from the trees, look at the forest, and step even further back and look at all the patterns And we have millions of listeners, some of whom are much younger, some of whom are older, and I think it will be interesting to kind of do a review. Jeff and I both grew up in the American Midwest, upper middle class neighborhood. Things were safe. Jeff, you remember in the 50s, we didn't lock our doors.
Well, I know neither of my sets of grandparents locked their doors. My parents didn't lock their doors. I locked my doors.
Well, yeah, nowadays you almost need a moat around your house. But, we lived in town in the 50s, and the side door wasn't locked because 2 or 3 times a week the milkman came between 4 and 5, let himself in the kitchen, and if you wanted milk, you left some money out and a note. We needed a quart of milk or some ice cream, and he left it, made change, and walked out the door. The meter reader came once a month, tapped on the door, opened the door, and said, "Meter reader," walked in the house, walked down in the cellar, and read the gas meter. If you tried that today, he'd be very dead very quickly, I'm afraid.
Well, there was some talk last week. All of these new electric meters are uplinked to satellite. They're not meter readers that come around and read your power electric meter on your house anymore.
Well, they still do here, fortunately.
They still do in some places, but increasingly it's becoming uplinked. And so now there was some to do about, well, what does this satellite signal do to the people in the house or the people around it? Or
Bill, you've been in the forefront of this, haven't you, Dr. Bill?
Yep. Yeah, I am. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I mean it's dangerous, right?
In terms of humans.
Well, I don't know.
In which way?
And the radiation from the radio frequency radiation is. I know there's more and more frequent news about cell phone technology and brain tumors and carry it in your pocket and get cancer and that sort of thing. And
yeah, we had.
I'm not sure.
Well, what happens is that those increase the breakdown of the blood-brain barrier, and we had on the program. We'll have him back on tomorrow, tomorrow. We'll have Dr. Bob Dennis from NASA. He's an engineer, and it's called frequency-coupled harmonic radiation. And what it does is it actually couples with the frequencies are harmonic with different structures in the cells, and it can disrupt not only the blood-brain barrier, it can cause stress on nerve cells, inducing tumor, it can cause stress on cells, inducing cancer. It can cause stress on cells, which cause accelerated oxidative stress and degeneration. So, the cell phones, Wi-Fi networks, and smart meters are all bad. And the new cell phones, I tell people, please never stick them on the side of your head unless you're planning on cooking your brain for lunch.
Well, how do you, I go through these airport scanners at times, and I guess they're an X-ray, right? The body of full body.
No, it's a terahertz wave. Terahertz waves are a sideband of microwaves, and there's constant terahertz waves coming from the sun, but they're pretty weak. But terahertz waves, and they decrease the energetics of them. But I took care of employees working on classified projects, and one of the projects was a collimated high-intensity terahertz wave that was tuned to cause an apoptosis of cells by activating a gene in chromosome 16. And what it would do is make your cells release peroxisomes and lysosomes, so you'd start getting nauseated within a few minutes after getting hit by this beam, getting disoriented and going blind, and within so many minutes having cardiac arrhythmias, cardiac arrest, and then liquefaction of the tissues as you die. So, terahertz waves are bad. Again, we're surrounded by radiation. The key is, are you taking nutraceuticals to block that or allow your tissues to heal after you've been assaulted? So it's a big deal. And people ignore it, but to their own demise. And welcome back. And Tim was telling me all about his new expanded new live stream TV news show. And I guess you'll be doing it with your colleague as well, which you can do some aspects in Spanish, which is good for our Spanish audience. I think people are really looking forward to it. Your blog is one of the best out there. The top blogs that I think in the world are Gerald Salente's and yours and Joel Skousen. Those are the top three. Your blog, Joel Skousen. Yeah. And it's right up there.
I'm
and
way
I think
behind
if you do
today in terms of uplinking. My blog, sorry, folks, it's not uplinked yet today.
I select those three because you're the most level-headed, so you don't jump to conclusions. You have good references and historical and other background, and you try to give people what I call a Christian viewpoint, because, to be honest with you, if you don't have a Christian viewpoint, you really aren't going to get this. You're not going to get it from a secular agnostic, a Muslim, a Baha'i, a Buddhist, or whatever outlook. And we're not talking about just what we call the dyed-in-the-wool, ultra-conservative, not thinking about anything broader, or not talking about prophetic issues, because a lot of Christians, they don't want to get into the stuff. It's touchy. It upsets their relatives and friends. If you bring up these topics, I'm sure you've been the life of the party until you open up a topic like this, and it's like opening up a bad banana at a party, and all of a sudden, and people say, "Oh, that banana! I mean, they'll run." It's like, "Oh, it's black. Don't eat it." Or it smells bad.
It's scary to talk about the world that we're in now, particularly when you look at the fact that we have people at the very apex of power, particularly in the West, that are determined to steer us to the Third World War. And I'll tell you, what I see happening, and this is one spiritual aspect to this that I don't think a lot of people are picking up on. We are being fed in the mainstream media an increasingly vehement line about what these Islamic extremists are doing. Now, as I've said before, you will never hear me support Islam. I don't believe in the religion, and there are many extremists. But I also know when a psychological warfare op is running, and the reason it's running is a spiritual aspect. They want us to sign on to the Third World War. They want us to demand that we take action and demand that we get into the Third World War, because that spiritually brings it on us, you see.
Well, to me, a lot of that is we have these. I forget what we said the other day. I think there were about 140 wars that we're involved in around the world, something along that.
Right.
In 140 wars, there's a lot of money to float around Washington with.
Right.
And I think of those wars, a huge percentage of that money goes to lobbyists and places where it pumps those wars up and increases the war cry. And, as a consequence, there are more wars and more war profits, and there are more lobbyists, and the thing feeds on itself.
And wars seems to be our number one product from America. We ship most of our factories overseas. We have about 100 million Americans of working age that are totally without jobs, but we got more wars.
Well, let's talk about solutions. And I mentioned this before last week about Rand Paul, and I totally agree with yourself that he has to, although he's making quote alliances, wait till you see Rand. He'll be more like his father, Ron Paul. He's going to make sure he's got a choke chain around the Israelis, and they're not going to be able to run us. He's also going to disentangle us with foreign entanglements that'll get us in more stupid wars. He's going to deal with our enemies properly. What they should do is, as I say, annex the state of Israel so we can go to sleep at night, rebuild the American economy, and make the U.S. Fed Reserve gone so our Treasury takes over money making, and start to have a system.
Dr. Bill, you may be right. I don't have a crystal ball, but I don't have a lot of faith in our politicians.
Well, actually, the thing is that we need to steer them. Remember, we can put a bit in their mouth and make sure we steer them. I'm trying to get Rand Paul on the program, and if I succeed, you'll be in the panel to ask him questions, because I want him on the hot seat.
Well, I hope you succeed, but I'm not holding my breath on it, because
let's put it this way.
Politicians don't like legitimate questions. They don't.
No, actually, remember now, he's an eye doctor, and he wants to be legitimized. We have a lot of fancy speechwriters like Ted Cruz, and Ted Cruz is a Canadian. His wife is in the pit of vipers, as he said already, the CFR pit of vipers, so he goes to sleep with a viper every night. But he's a warmonger. And so are all the other Republican candidates. They're all warmongers. The only one that's
they're
not.
all competing. They're not running for the public's vote. Right now they're running for the extreme Zionist vote for whatchamacallit out in Las Vegas and the Koch brothers. Who's going to get $1 billion from the Vegas successor to Lansky? Who's going to get $1 billion from these two brothers that have got a couple billion to invest?
The Israelis don't even know what they want. They don't want war, to be honest with you. There might be a few maniacs like Netanyahu and this guy that's running these Las Vegas casinos. What they really need, they do need a strong ally, but not a strong ally that's willing to tag along if they go and do something stupid like bomb Iran. You know, like bomb Iran McCain.
He wants he tells us to.
You know what? If I was president, do you think if I was president, I would say it in Yiddish as well. My grandfather spoke Yiddish. Do you think I'd walk up to Netanyahu and say something to him to give him a pause, if I was president, that he wouldn't open his pseudo-Jewish yap anymore, and he wouldn't think he's going to wag the dog of America with his tail of Israel? And they wouldn't think that they're going to, number one, and we also wouldn't serve them up so that the Muslim nations around them would sacrifice them, which they will do in a heartbeat. I learned a lesson a long time ago, and this is from my Maronite Christian relatives. They'd say, when you go to Israel with the Muslims, and by the way, most of the Christians in Israel are Arab. People don't know that. They're Arab, or they're Khazarian Jews that converted to become Messianic Christians coming from Russia and other former CIS countries coming to Israel as Jews, but they're Khazarian Jews who became Christians. So the largest new group of Christians is actually Khazarian Jews in Israel. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah,
Khazarian Jews aren't even genetic. They are not even genetic. And I know the guys at the Messianic Jewish Fellowship in Dizengoff Circle in Tel Aviv, they're friends of mine. So what people should start getting a perspective is, even these guys in Las Vegas, they want to control America. They don't need to control America. We need to control the situation. We should annex not only the state of Israel, but we should annex the entire territory of the Abrahamic Covenant, right from the Nile River right through to the Euphrates River. We should take over the whole territory and just say, you're next, it's over. And
how's that going to work if they've got nukes and don't go along with it?
Do you know what kind of level of weapons that America has that are way beyond nukes? No nation, and by the way, this is what Russia and China have always restrained them. The only thing that restrained them is they were terrified they were giving a pipeline of intelligence information and technology to build nukes. We have weapons that are centuries ahead of anybody else. Centuries. If we decided to make a nation cease to exist, as my friends in Space Command said, we can press a few buttons and without firing one missile or one bullet, they will cease to exist. And no underground cities will save them from what we have. What we really need to do is operate from a position of strength and kindness. Strength and kindness, like Jesus said. Welcome back, and I guess a dynamic trio. I'm in the background here. Please continue, gentlemen, because I think it's important to have a dialogue. If you hear a message from
I would love
similar message or variation
of
message.
Idea of getting political candidates on, and I will make myself available any day to interview these characters. What I will not do, and I'm sure they know that, is I'm not going to change who I am. I'm a Christian, and I care about America.
No. Do you think, Tim, neither you or I, we are sheepdogs, but guess what? Sheepdogs do not kiss butt of sheep or wolves.
That's right.
We don't. Okay, so I'm not asking you to do that. We are going to call it straight.
I forced Tony Blair out of office a few years ago, and
I know you did. You're a good guy. And what we want to do is we want to.
I'm very concerned about the direction the world and the nation is taking, that we got 100 million people out of work, that the lying mainstream media and the politicians say we're in a recovery from a recession when we got 100 million people out of work, but but according to them, we've got less than 6% unemployment. All this stuff is just lie after lie after lie after lie. And where we're headed is... Well, we're through. Go ahead, Jeff. I'm sorry.
No, I'd say I would be willing to question, because my dad was involved in politics. I'll admit it. He was a fundraiser. He knew people from the White House down for many years. And, one of the things I would consider would be to question a candidate, but only with the condition that there weren't canned questions with canned answers. I don't want somebody to hand me a sheet of paper and say, you answer you answer that, and so I want to be able to ask.
I wouldn't do that. I guarantee you I won't.
Top three questions, Jeff. Okay, gentlemen, I'm gonna put it to you now. I'm gonna ask you a tough question. To say, I'm of Scottish, Irish, and Viking heritage, so I'm going to ask you, gentlemen, 3 questions you're going to ask the hot seat politician, whoever it is. Democrat or Republican. By the way, we might bring on Democrats too, because I'd like to see them in our geopolitical blender, But what 3 questions would you ask Tim and Jeff of a candidate, whoever they are, on the hot seat? What would those questions be?
Well, my number one for Tim would be, how do we handle the issue of APEC and this total domination of the American Congress and lesser extent the administration by so-called Friends of Israel that are putting Israel ahead of the United States, while at the same time providing enough security to Israel that they survive and they're not overrun? How do we do that? Because what we've got right now is the tip of the tail, not the tail, but the tip of the tail wagging the dog. And that's not the American way. That's wrong. Well, and we don't need to be in all these wars that we're in for Israel or the global bankers or anybody else. How do we change that?
Well,
that would be number one question.
I think a question for me...
What would you ask, Jeff? What would be your...
One of the things I would ask, and this comes from my grandfather was a stockbroker for 40 or 50 years. I worked in 70 and 71 for Morgan Stanley on Wall Street, and one of the things I would ask would have to do with the Fed. 99.9% of the U.S. population has no idea the Fed is not part of the government at all. They don't know that it's a private institution that prints unlimited money. And so one of my first questions would be, what will you do about the Fed? I think that's a solid question, and I think nobody addressed it. And I think it needs to be addressed because it is a printing company, literally, that's out of control. The press is run overtime, overspeed, and never stop. And, so I want to know...
Actually, just about all of the money raised by the individual income tax, federal income tax, goes to the paying of interest on our debt. And we would have 0 interest on our debt if we were doing what Lincoln did during the Civil War, and that's issuing greenbacks, because the federal government can't delegate that authority. Only the federal government can print money. Yet we do delegate that authority to these primarily European central bankers who profit enormously. We need another $1 trillion for more wars. That's fine. They do a bookkeeping entry. Poof, there's $1 trillion. And by the way, you have to pay the principal back plus compound interest. Have a good day.
That's right. Do you want $25 billion in cash to disappear in the Mideastern desert and nobody knows anything about what happened to any of it? These sorts of things happen all the time. And nobody has a finger on it, nobody has control of it, and nobody talks about it.
Of course not. Well,
okay. One question. What's your second question?
6 corporations, globalist corporations, all run by vehement Zionists who control over 96% of the American mainstream news media. So the discourse in the mainstream media is not there. It's us. It's the alternative media.
But Tim, part of the problem is the definition of Zionism. Jesus, when he comes back, he's a Zionist. You know that, right? In fact, the Abrahamic covenant was made with Abraham and not only the Arab peoples under his son, his Arab son, but also to all the 12 tribes of Israel. So Jesus is a Zionist, but it's a different kind of Zionism. It isn't a little strip of land where there's a lot of historical things in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. Zionism is a world domination by a bunch of bankers who ultimately want to grasp life extension technology and kill most of us. They worship the coiled serpent god, and they believe that super science and merging with technology like Ray Kurzweil is their goal. My first question would be, because we have a pro-life president, is number one, will you have a pro-life amendment to the Roe versus Wade to get rid of abortion? That's number one. Because you see, the reason why our country is under judgment and why we're dealing with bank issues is because we're not pro-life. My second question is, will you bring back and make the Treasury coin money and wipe out the debt, the international debt that's ready to swallow us up? Not only here, but worldwide, because our biggest export in America now is debt to other countries. So we're killing them, too. And the third thing is, we need to get, my third question was, when are you going to annul the appointment and allowing of the United Nations? The United Nations does not serve any purpose except globalism. What we should do is, once we have our American currency back under Federal Reserve, we should make bilateral treaties with each country separately. There should never be an overall treaty that captures America and shackles us to an international cabal where we make an arrangement with Belize or Russia or China. It should all be a separate deal with each country.
It wasn't an accident that the Rockefellers gave the land the UN buildings on.
Right. So my point is that when are we going to go back to not only the Federal Reserve, but when are we going to abolish the United Nations and the World Health Organization, which are abominations? Because they are not satisfying. Yeah, and the World Bank. Yeah, what we have to do is, when they go to Basel, Switzerland, and they have these conferences dealing with interbank exchange, they also shouldn't be able to speculate with people's money and allow derivatives, which is an artificial economy. When are they going to get back to what I call real economy, which is, we can measure your economy with a formula, and it's an actuarial formula, which would be what is your output of agricultural goods, intellectual property, how educated is your population. You can actually put a quantum on this. And you can say, your economy deserves to have this amount of income. We will, as a nation, interact with you on the same formula for America as the value of your economy, so we can lock our currencies together with, say, Cuba or wherever country it happens to be. But we'll have trade agreements where you have to honor our intellectual property. We can't deal with China. Although they're a so-called most favored nation, they're a bunch of maniacs. They don't understand the first principles of business, which is you can't steal our intellectual property, have industrial espionage, and then have rules in our country that shackle business, so it takes 5 years to accomplish something you can do in 90 days with no environmental or workers' compensation regulations to protect the workers in China or Indonesia. If we brought business back...
I've got a couple more questions when we come back, and I imagine Jeff has a couple too, right?
Yeah, and that's the questions I'd ask him. And by the way, out there, if you're listening, 800-259-5791, it's yours too. And Tim will be back hour 3 tomorrow, and hour 1 tomorrow is open lines. If you want to pop in again, Tim, we wanted to have a lot more questions with this election cycle coming up, 791. And we appreciate you out there. We want you to get the best Nutrimeds only at Nutrimedical.com. Don't go elsewhere. You're wasting your time, money, and you're not going to get the kind of advice and help.
Well, you know what? Hey, I just had a brain flash here, Dr. Bill and Jeff. We have literally millions of listeners, and we're trying to get Rand Paul to join us. Folks, pick up a telephone. Call U.S. Senator Rand Paul in Washington, D.C., or in one of his Kentucky offices. I'm sure he's got an office in Louisville.
Right.
Tell them you want them to appear on the Nutrimedical Report show.
Yeah, and he wants to. And by the way, we're going to be nice. We're conservative Christian. Well, but we're going to ask pointed questions, and we are not bootlickers. But we want to make sure that we properly christen him if he is a candidate that's going to do number one, pro-life is number one here on the list. Number two is pro-capital. Get capital back in the American economy so a young man, 26, with a really good idea in his garage can actually build a machine or a tool or something, and he can then turn that into a medium business, a larger business. We need entrepreneurship back, but we need credit. We need everybody so that in a two-person family, one income, adequate income, is enough to support a family with a car, a home, and a vacation. So that we don't, like in the 1950s, we had that. Now, two incomes is barely enough to even stay above float. It's ridiculous. Yeah. People are getting what I call incomes.
Well, Rockefeller, this is one of the stories that came out from one of the Rockefellers, was telling a buddy of his this, and his buddy ended up publishing it. And basically what he said, the reason that with World War II we pushed women into the workforce is we wanted to establish a two-income family because we needed the extra tax base. Remember the debt, you know?
Yeah, but what they do that, and now the cost of living is so high.
Income tax goes to paying off the debt.
Right, but the average income now, the average middle class income is sinking, and with real inflation, you know, I remember that I compared wages when I worked doing my biochemistry degree in early 1970, 70 to 73. I worked on the railway, and when I worked, this is the first couple of years before I worked in the lab. And when I worked on the railway, I did 3 summers for 6 months, and I was pretty buff. I mean, I was bigger than Arnold. I was a big boy. And I can tell you, I was making major dollars. I didn't need a cent of borrowing money until second year medical school. I had a 5-figure bank account. And when I was getting paid, it was like, basic wage was like $9 an hour, and then when you're getting double or triple time, you're getting almost $30 an hour. And this is 40.
Students who would love to make $9 an hour today.
Yeah, but then I'm getting double or triple time. I'm getting like $22 an hour. So this is 45 years ago.
Jeff, you were an audio salesman, oh my goodness, what was that, 40 years ago? And you made a heck of an income.
About 4 figures a week in the early 70s. And I remember there was a Toyota dealer down the street, and I went down the street, and he showed me a Celica GT with everything on it, and I was a funky, hippie-looking guy, and he said, boy, you couldn't buy that anyway. And I told him right there, I said, well, guess what, buddy? 2 weeks of my paycheck will buy that car.
Wow.
He about had a heart attack. And,
and nowadays you don't see that.
Few and far between, unfortunately, anymore.
Well, that's why we have 107.3 million Americans that are basically on the dole. And what the crazy Democrats want to do is increase that by increasing illegal immigration and immigration from Muslim countries, from all the disasters we're bringing to Sudan and Somalia and all these countries. And not all these Muslims coming over here are nice Muslims. Believe it or not, in the Middle East... In the Middle East, Muslims, including Arabs or whatever, anybody from the Middle East will give the shirt off their back or the food off their table even if they're starving, but don't cross them. But the problem is we have extreme Islam here being recruited in the prisons, especially black, and we have extreme Islam coming over here that once they get a full belly, they're flying back to fight for ISIS.
You just led into one of the two other questions that I have. One has to do with how do we reestablish constitutional rule to our republic, and because right now we're headed towards becoming a failed third world nation with a police state attitude, and
the police state is federalized.
So how do we actually, no fancy words, but how do we really turn that around? And I'm also very concerned about the fact that we have a great deal of police violence, but at the same time, and I understand both sides of it, because I have black friends, I have police friends, and I know that, for instance, in all of our communities, both white, black, Chicano, that we have an element now because of the way we've structured things. We have an element that's out of control, and they're very immoral, they're very violent, they're gangs and all, and the cops are really up against it. At the same time, we have some police officers that think because they've got a badge, they've got a right to shoot people right and left.
Tim, I got a real simple solution. It's called technical. And Jeff, you're a technical person, and I'll give you a list of equipment that I know exists right now. The United Nations is actually getting is dazzle guns that'll hit you with so many thousands of candle power of light that you're blind for half an hour. Number two, we've got, these high-powered bean bags. We have a weapon actually that can aim at you, and it'll make you have a grand mal seizure right there in front of you. And it's a wide spray weapon, so it'll knock down 20 people right in front of you. There's no need for us to have lethal weapons, although the cops should all have them. They shouldn't have using lethal force as the first step. Number two, we should make sure that we go through communities, and if you're a registered gun owner, you have to take a gun owner course, and you should have to be registered in the local militia so the militia knows who you are. And we're not talking about government, we're talking militia. I think all these cities that are being federalized, this is the sine qua non of a police state, is to federalize city and town police forces to make them federal. We have to go back to a civilian militia.
You have all of this excess military gear, a lot of equipment that the military doesn't even want to buy, and I know a lot of military people. There are 3 bases around my city.
Right.
They're making so many things: troop transports, tanks, all sorts of items that end up in small police departments in towns of 20,000 people.
There's no need for that. We have a caller, Ron from Washington State, that has a question. Go ahead, Ron.
Short and sweet. I think the only way to resolve the problem of wages in this country is by tariffs and duties.
Absolutely. I don't understand why we don't have tariffs and duties on all products. For example, when they don't have environmental standards in China and they send over melamine-laced dog food that kills people, it kills their animals. When we have...
I don't eat anything that comes from China. I was in Sam's the other day, and I saw a nice big bag of organic frozen vegetables. So I thought, oh, good. I pick it up, and it said made in China. I said, forget it.
Isn't that crazy? How can they call it organic when it comes from China? How can they do that?
Well, they have these tilapia farms where they feed pig feces to the fish, and that is all organic.
Right, isn't that crazy? And then the other thing is that 60% of the waterways are toxic in China. They have air conditioners everywhere. In Japan, it's so bad with the pollution in their major city centers. They have to have an oxygen tank on their front, in the front of the cars, taking oxygen by nasal prongs because they're in trouble. I agree. Tariffs and duties. If we had tariffs and duties on goods coming in,
200 years in this country.
Why don't we have it? All of a sudden, industry would say, hey, why does a transnational corporation want to build stuff overseas when they have plenty of energy here, don't have to transport it?
Because they can get somebody to work for 54 cents an hour.
That's not going to be that's not the biggest cost. We're moving to robotic production. And this is what's going on in Japan. People don't know about this because the Japanese are pretty with it, although they're stupid in dealing with Fukushima. 3D printing. Pretty soon, somebody in his garage could make a part for a thing with a 3D printer and a laptop. And you could then have a quality assurance to make those parts are shipped out every day from somebody's garage, one part. And
you can buy a printer for just over $1,000 at Sam's right now.
Right. So my point is, where we're going here is not bigger is better and giant. We could literally have contracted out to have all of those corporations move back. The big problem we're going to have in the 21st century is most of the human race will be unemployed by high technology, intelligence systems, and free energy, which is coming, and life extension, which will mean you're not going to die at 60 or 70. You might be dying at 300 or 400 due to some war or something stupid like a comet comes and hits you in the head. The problem we have right now is we're in a transition phase, and we have to get away from a bubble economy. We need to make sure that war isn't even an option in the future.
I've got 5 seconds. I've got to say my other question would be on Fukushima. What the hell are we going to do about that? And why haven't we done something? And as president, how are you going to protect the people in this country from that cancerous sore?
So far, Tim, it's being solved with trash bags.
Yeah, right. Yeah, Tim, you know what? I should have said that question, but you beat me to it. You did a good job today. Thanks a lot, Jeff, for coming on. Thank you, Ron, for calling in.
Paul's office in Washington or Louisville, Kentucky, call. Tell him to be on our show.
Absolutely, and Tim is ready with his questions, and he's got a minigun of questions ready for you. As I say, don't worry, you won't be in a star chamber, but there'll be tough questions.
And then we'll get Hillary next.
That'd be wonderful to get Hillary, Rotten Clinton.